Shalom and welcome to the 2021 Homeschool Family Conference, and I hope you've had a really good day. We've just finished the second day of our conference, and in this session, we're going to finish up our essential frameworks. We're going to talk about the 3 R's. That's reading, writing, and arithmetic, because they're so essential to everything else we do in homeschooling. My name is Ann Elliott, and I'm the creator and founder of HomeschoolingTorah.com. I am going to borrow heavily in this session from the work of other authors. And I wanted to mention a couple books that I really love, and I'm going to show you a couple of them. And in fact, I just wanted to tell you that I moved from the living room in here to our little YouTube studio so I could kind of be at my desk and show you all kinds of things that I have, and even use my whiteboard and kind of do it like I would do it if I were teaching at home. And I've just got all kinds of stuff here surrounding me. So we'll start out with some books that I love. So I just wanted to show you a couple books that are really special to me, and since they're here at my desk. And so this first one is called The 3 R's. It's by Ruth Beechick, and it's for reading, writing, and arithmetic. And it's meant for kindergarten through about 3rd grade. So about the time that someone has a good, strong grasp in reading and the ability to sound out words and start to just read for knowledge. And then you're going to go over here to You Can Teach Your Child Successfully by Ruth Beechick. And this is for grades 4 through 8. So you're going to want to wait on this book if your kids are a little bit younger, unless you just want to get a good teacher education, which would be fine. But I'm going to borrow heavily from the 3 R's today. And I'm going to not only borrow heavily, but I'm going to strongly encourage you to go out and purchase this book for your home library, because it's that important. This used to be, when I started homeschooling, this was actually 3 little booklets. And one of them was for reading, one of them was for writing, and one of them was for arithmetic. And I got these books when my oldest son was just 1 or 2 years old. And I went to my first homeschooling conference down in Florida, and the speakers at the conference said, "Why don't you all get this book?" And so I did. I bought it right there at the conference table in the vendor hall. And it's been one of the best books I've ever had. So I really want to encourage you, just because that was a long time ago and my son is now 25, doesn't mean that you shouldn't get this book. It's a classic, and I just think everyone should have it. Now they've combined it all into one handy book, which is really nice. It's sold by Mott Media. So anyway, go out and get this book. It's your first order of business. So it is essential for your children to have a strong start in reading, writing, and arithmetic if you are going to get any other education done for them. If a child can't read, you can't pass on information as well. Besides the fact that as they mature, it's going to be difficult for them to get a job and function in society. Most importantly, they're not going to be able to read for themselves the Word of God. And I do believe that's super important. So reading is one of the most essential things that you need in your homeschooling, which is why we're putting it on today, the essential framework. It's the essential framework for everything else that happens, and it gives your child a lot of independence. So if you are listening to this and your children are older and you feel like they've got down reading, writing, and arithmetic, I encourage you to listen anyway, because there may be things that you feel like after you've heard this video that you have maybe missed. And I want you to feel like you can go back and kind of fill in all the gaps. Okay. Basically what we want to do is we want to give our kids a really strong grasp from pre-reading, which happens at preschool age, all the way through to the time that they are able to pick up a book on their own and use it to enjoy reading or to gain more information. Now, there's a lot that has to happen from preschool, where they're just learning the sound of their letters, to I can just pick up any book and use it to learn from. And the time that you hit that end mark varies widely depending on your child and their unique abilities. So don't get hung up on grades and don't get hung up on ages. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you're progressing through. Okay. I want to encourage you, as we talk about reading, to think about the fact that you don't necessarily need a curriculum. Now, granted, we write curriculum here at Homeschooling Torah. We're working on a new series called Word Power, have been working on it for a while, and it's getting a lot closer to completion now. And you can buy flashcards, and you can buy stickers, and you can buy achievement maps, and you can buy all kinds of charts and workbooks that help you, progress supposedly systematically through. But I guess what I'm going to show you today is that if you didn't have the money for that, you could still teach your child to read at home with great confidence. And I want you to think about the fact too, that when you get a curriculum, you spent money for it. And like, let's say you were purchasing a $40 word power curriculum for first grade, and you got it home, it came in your mailbox, and you opened it up, and the first day you do it with your child. And let's say that your child does great for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then suddenly you hit a snag, and there's something in that reading curriculum that your child is struggling to understand. And so you have to ask yourself, I spent $40 on this curriculum, and now it feels like we're at a standstill. Maybe I should try a new curriculum. So you get a new curriculum, and you get all the bells and whistles, and you open up the box, and it has all the fun stuff, and it works for another 6 to 8 weeks. And then suddenly your child hits a plateau, and you're not going any further. And you're like, I just spent $99 for this box, and so on. It can go. When my first 3 or 4 children were starting to hit the reading age, I bought a lot of curriculum. I think I bought more in phonics than I did any other curriculum subject. And I think it's because, I eventually chalked it up to different learning styles, but just different ages where kids mature. And yet I felt that since I had bought the curriculum, we had to stick to it. And so there is something to be said for using curriculum as a guide to know what could potentially be taught next, but know that you can go in a different order if your child's already got that down. And maybe they missed something back here, or what, you can go in a different order. And if you make flashcards yourself, you aren't going to feel bad if you don't use them all, unless, of course, you spent hours and hours doing it. So again, instead of taking one day in the summertime to set up your entire school year and figure out on a calendar when every single sound is going to be taught to your child, when they're going to learn to read it, and then their brain doesn't actually look at your calendar, and you spent that entire day planning, and it's all wasted. I would encourage you to take this subject of reading and phonics and do it week by week, almost day by day. It's great to have curriculum. It saves you a lot of time and effort, and that's kind of what we're here for. But just take it very loosey-goosey. Homeschooling Torah members, they pay one set amount for the entire curriculum. And one of the benefits of that is if you have to go slower or faster through phonics, you can. Even monthly members that start at day 1 and only can see month 1 of their curriculum, it's not true in math and phonics, because these 3 R's are essential, and you're going to be able to need to see the curriculum if you're going to be able to skip forward and go backwards, move up a level, down a level. So that we have given you permission to do. And we hope that you will take that permission to use all of the curriculum on day 1 of your membership, and calm down about the money, and calm down about the calendar, and not think about it anymore, and go at the speed your child is learning. Okay. So I hope got on that little side note right there. And I hope that you will definitely not be tempted to teach to the curriculum instead of teaching your unique child. Okay. The typical American also has the danger of pushing a child hard and fast, because we think that the earlier a child learns something, that must be better. There's a principle of optimum timing in which you teach a child, and it may not be according to the curriculum scope and sequence. And it may be faster, and it often is much slower. So don't feel tied to those things. Think of your curriculum as a resource, as a support person that's there to help you, but not the boss, and definitely not the master of your home. Okay, so let's talk about 5 steps that Ruth Beechick identifies in learning to read. The first one is pre-reading, and this is what we typically think of as preschool. When do you teach a child to read? Do you start when they're 6 months old and start giving them sight word cards? And there are people that do that, and a case could be made for it. Or do you wait until they're 8 or 9 and wait and start reading then? And that you could make a case for that as well. I think the issue is to think about the fact that it's not usually the baby or the young child or the 4-year-old that's asking to learn to read so much as it's the mom or dad feeling like there's some necessity in teaching the child to read. You need to make sure that the child actually has a desire to learn before you start fretting about learning to read. And I think if you'll keep that in mind, you'll know when to start. When your child is showing the signs of, I really want to read more than anything else, then that's a good time to start. Don't do it because there's some outward pressure or inward motivation for success or whatever driving you, but wait for your child to show an interest in learning to read. There was a study done where 2 different school districts started to teach kindergartners to read. And the one school district did very heavy duty phonics and sight words day after day after day, intensive academic instruction in reading. The other school district took a more hands-off approach and taught the kids a lot more about, let's melt ice cubes today. Let's go check out grasshoppers today. Let's have a butterfly farm. Let's do a walk and find out what we learn while we're outside in nature. And these 2 school districts watched these children's reading abilities from kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, and in 3rd grade, reevaluated them to see if there was any benefit to the approach that had been used in kindergarten. And sure enough, there was a great big difference between the 2. The ones that had started heavy phonics instruction in kindergarten, whether they were ready or not, but just daily, really getting hit in the books, they were behind those who started with more of a science hands-on approach and less of an academic reading approach. Why is that? Well, the reason is, as you study the outside world, things that you're interested, a little child going on a walk and finding butterflies and collecting them and learning more about their growth and behavior, that child is expanding their vocabulary. They're expanding their knowledge of everything in the world and not just how to sound out words. Because of that, when they get to the end of 3rd grade and they are starting to pick up actual books and read them for themselves, they have learned more than just how to sound out words. They have learned how to put it into a context. So like they could read a book on butterflies and they have actual life experience to understand what happens. Where the kids that have just phonics they can sound out everything, but they have no life experience, no vocabulary, no other outward understanding to plug it into. And so they found that as a general rule, those kids were behind by the time they got to the end of 3rd grade. So the real stuff that your child learns about as they walk around, as they play, as they interact with their family, their grandparents, their neighborhood, their yard, their farm, all of those real world experiences basically become the foundation for everything else that they learn and make that learning more possible. And I'm not saying that you don't ever want to have academic learning, but just that you need to make that academic learning a priority after you've got a good foundation. Does that make sense? It reminds me of Deuteronomy 6, where it says that we are to talk with our children as we walk, as we sit, as we lie down, as we stand. I know I have those in the wrong order. And you're supposed to be doing that because those discussions of real life situations and how you would apply God's word to them lays a foundation that all other learning can go on. And that's why Proverbs can tell us that the fear of the Lord, the fear of Yehovah is the beginning of wisdom. But fools despise all that. You have to have that discussion of the word of God that applies to real words. So you could go outside and talk about how Yehovah made the butterflies and then touch them, look at them, color them, put them, in those little cages that you can hang in your house. And that will give you a better education than just sounding out words and reading fake short little 3-word sentences in a book. So it's so important to have real world discussions and real world thought processes going on, more so than academic training, especially in those preschool years. So if you think, though, that your child has had lots of that real world experience and you want to start teaching them really academically how to learn to read, then try out little balloons. Teach a child to write or pronounce a word or a sound. Like I remember being really little and learning the sound for jaguar, and it was in the curriculum that we were using, and the teacher had a picture of a jaguar and a picture of a jaguar car. So, and it was a silly story about it. And those little learning about the sounds, it's a good way to test if the child understands that jaguar starts with a sound like j, and just put out little trials. And if the child is interested, in the best way to do this is when you're sitting on the couch reading a book to your children. And as you're reading a book to your children, you have lots of opportunity to point, with your finger underneath the word and say, do you know what that word says? And if the child even has a concept that there are words on the page, and I think that you'll see a child, jump up on the couch with a book and pretend to read, that's a good sign that you're getting close. It doesn't mean they're totally ready, but they're getting close. Step 2 would be beginning to read. And this would be equivalent to basically our kindergarten and Homeschooling Torah. And this is our word power K. This is where you begin teaching them the sounds of all the letters. Okay, so this is where you teach them what each letter looks like and what sound it makes. So if you're doing the letter F, you show them a lowercase f and a capital letter F. And in our curriculum, even a Hebrew letter that makes a sound just like F does. And this is where you teach them the form, what it looks like, and the sound. And there are so many fun ways to do this, like make a letter of the week and go on a walk around the house and find all the things that start with the F sound, from the fish in the fish tank to French fries to, I'm making this up on the spot. What else starts with the letter F? Food, have fun. This is why I use a curriculum, because I can't remember them as I'm on the top of my head. If you were doing the letter P, you might find a pan and a pencil and look in a book and find a penguin and so on. So you can find those things. You might do all kinds of fun games to like point to something and see if they can remember a sound that they've already learned and what letter that looks like. This is where you're going to teach them how to make the letter, but not necessarily on lined paper yet. This is just nice and big. You might go outside with sidewalk chalk and do this in a really big, like 2 or 3 feet big letter F or letter P, and just make it all about fun. You do want them to make it correctly because they're forming habits, but you're not so much concerned about the size of it or that you can control all your fine muscles, but just introducing them to the fact that there are letters and that each of those letters represents a sound. Okay. You don't even need to necessarily start knowing the order of the letters quite yet, because that's something that's still coming. So then, okay, so now you've introduced the letters, you've got a good foundation. Now let's go to step 3. And this is the part that everybody recognizes as learning to read. Okay. And this is just where you teach them to blend sounds together to make a word. We don't need to overcomplicate this. We're going to start with some simple sounds to kind of show the children how it works and kind of how our language works. And not just our language, by the way, it's almost every language in the world that works like this. But it wouldn't matter if this was Spanish or Hebrew. But you want them to kind of get the idea that, oh, that's how it works. And once they get it, and they've learned enough sounds to start being able to sound things out for themselves, they're going to take off. Okay. And sometimes this process is the hardest one because there's a lot to figure out. So don't rush. Again, if you're going down the process in 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 12 weeks in, you hit what looks like a roadblock and the child loses interest, then just put it away for a while and review what you've already been doing as you go about your life. Go back to those real world experiences. Okay. Let's talk about blending. So you take a short vowel sound, and we say short vowel, like for A, we would mean ah. It's just more common. So we're going to start with those. And then you take a consonant, which is all the other letters. And most curriculum will help you understand if you don't know which ones are vowels and which ones are consonants. No worry, you're going to get that in the curriculum. But let's say we're going to do the letter N, and it's a consonant, and we know that it says n. So we're going to teach them, and then we're going to put the a up here with an A, and we might point from the a to the and then let me show you on my whiteboard. Okay, let me just show you real quick on my whiteboard and see that you understand what I'm talking about. And so let's say we're going to learn the letter A. Okay, there's an A and it says A. And then there's an N. And let's say we've already learned F. And then we're going to do a P. Okay, so we can take that A and look at it and go, and okay, might not draw it. It's hard to draw in this thing. And you might go AF. App, and you might say that's not really a word, but I just want you to see that it works, and then try to put them like they would be in a book. And or AF or app. Okay, so you're just going to step by step start to show them that as you read through this, an, AF, app, that it works, that there's like, this is like solving clues. And I think kids really like that because they love mysteries just as much as we do. And learning to read is kind of like solving a mystery. So what you're doing is you're giving them the little bits of clues to see how the language works, and then they're going to take it and run with it. Soon you're going to move on to 3-letter words. As you sound out and you put a consonant on both sides and a vowel in the middle, and they're going to learn to practice and write it and read it in lots and lots of different ways. Now, blending skill is not something that you want to hurry. With most children, this takes 1 to 2 to 3 years. You're going to spend a lot of time on it, and there's lots of ways you can make it fun. And the point of a curriculum is that so you remember that you wanted them to read it, you wanted them to write it, you wanted them to spell it, you wanted them to practice in cursive, all of these things. You need a curriculum to kind of guide you through, but remember again that you can pause and you can camp out somewhere for a few days. Now, if the blending skill is slow in coming, then take a break for a few days and go back to all that real stuff in your life, okay? That real discussion, that's what real stuff is. And come back to the blending in a little while. After you've gotten through the blending stage, and I would say that would be like word power 1, word power 2 for us, phonics and reading levels 1 and 2, then you're going to go into decoding. So decoding is when your child has figured out that things are blended together. And now this would continue on in that first and second grade time, and it doesn't have to be, but it takes this a few years. They are going to start tackling every sound that there is. And this is where curriculum comes in and gives you a thorough listing of all the sounds. Don't go any faster than your child can learn, okay? Tell them how to look at a letter and make the sounds and come up with a whole entire word, and you're eventually going to get multiple syllables, but also tell them how to write it and come up with that sound and that word and even those multiple syllables. And if your brain starts to get full when you're doing these things, then stop for the day and come back to it later and do lots and lots of review. So if you ever were to get her book, let me get it up here again, Ruth Beachick's book, The 3 R's. She's got lots of charts in here about how to go about an order of teaching this, but this is where I want you to remember again that different people, when they're putting together systems of phonics, are just going to get a different order to it, but you don't have all that done yourself. I'm sure there are bits of phonics that you're not sure how they work and how to decode things, and you've survived, right? You can read. And I know it's important for spelling and so on to get the phonics down, but don't fret if one curriculum does it in a different order, or one seems to have 50 phonograms and another has 75 phonograms. That's not so much important as learning the skill of decoding and the very idea that you can decode, because after a while, you just kind of figure it out on your own. You figured it out and you didn't really need that curriculum. And so at that point, the curriculum just becomes a good way to review. Your child is likely going to go faster at some point than the curriculum is. So that's, again, go at the pace of your child. When you're doing this, when you're teaching your children to read, there's a few supplies that you're going to want to have on hand. And one of my favorites is just a whiteboard. And this whiteboard's old. You can kind of tell it's just looking a little beat up, and has 2 sides to it. So if I can get it to pick it up, it's got the lines so that you can practice. But if you don't feel like worrying about actual handwriting practice, you can just sound things out. Now, magnetic whiteboards are nice because you can get all kinds of letter X, that would be a hard one to start with. There's our F. So you can get lots of letters and that are magnetic. And I just love putting these all over. Like this tub is pretty magnetic learning letters. I just got that online. And this one separates the vowels from the consonants with colors so that it's really easy to swap out your vowels instead of an E, F. I think I've got that backwards. There we go. Let me do it. So instead of an A, you can put an E, and then you can swap it out for an O and so on. So these are wonderful, and whiteboards and magnets. And if you're learning a different language, such as Hebrew, you can get Hebrew characters for those letters as well. So it's just practicing the sounds and then learning to blend them and decode bigger words and harder phonograms. So, the word cough, like that is C-O-U-G-H. That O-U-G-H is one phonogram, that off sound, but it says different things in different words. And so it can become this really complicated phonics discussion where you're like, okay, well, if you see this, then it's going to be this. And most kids don't need it to have that kind of detail. They just know that that's the word cough because they've encountered it in their reading, maybe in their curriculum, and they just start to tackle it. And I wouldn't worry too much if they've gotten, every little phonics rule down. That is not necessary. Okay. Phonics is just messy. And the idea is to teach them to decode, not to get every last little bit right. Okay, writing skill and reading skill should go hand in hand. And when I say writing here, I'm not talking about creative writing where you write stories and paragraphs and later you're going to write essays and papers. I'm just talking about the actual ability to do handwriting. So as you write, your brain connects the sound of that movement. It's crazy, but when I had a concussion, I found that this didn't affect me in English because I've been reading for a really long time and my concussion wasn't that bad. But in Hebrew, I was trying to make some Hebrew letters. So I would make the Hebrew letter and I would used to know it, but I'm just making this up. I don't think this is a real word. Anyway, I couldn't remember all of a sudden what sound those letters made. Even though I knew them, that was too new of a memory, I guess. And when I got the concussion, and again, that's not a real word, I just couldn't connect the movement with the sound. So let's say I was making 8. And I needed to know that made a B sound. Just taking and making a whole entire line of them in my notebook was what I had to do to get the sound back again. And I had to keep doing it. Even though I had already learned it, it required me to repeat it over and over. And as I made each one of those, I would say B, B, B. And so the reason that's important is I found out I got a really bad migraine after doing that. It was crazy how difficult it was for me to associate a sound and a shape, the shape of a letter, and how hard my brain was working that it gave me a migraine. I want you to know that your kids, when they are writing and having to, make a whole line of the letter F and say, it's really important that as they make the Fs, that they're saying each one, because it reinforces in the brain, in the mind, what the sound of that letter is in a way that you can't do just from looking at a flashcard or magnets or a book. And I want to encourage you also to keep the lessons short, because what I learned with my concussion is that your brain can only do so many new neurons at a time. And so you need to keep the lessons short, repeating them often, and you will find that your children learn a lot better than if you have lots of long lessons and get discouraged why your kids aren't learning. It's important also as your children learn to make words. I'm going to share my screen again. So it's important as your children learn to make words that you give them a good model to copy. So let's say that you as mom, you come in here and you write the word tree. Okay. Now my model's not very good because I'm writing on my tablet here and my little whiteboard tablet, but you can write nice and you write it on them and then they come back and in their writing, they try to copy it. Even if you have a book and you can show them the word tree. Now, the problem is in a book, the font's a little different than how we write. So just having them copy mom and her handwriting. So you can take a verse and you can say, you can write the verse out and then have them write the verse underneath and copy it. So you become the model. And as you model it, that's what teaching is. Teaching is modeling something and giving someone the opportunity to copy you. And that's why the Bible says that a child, when he's been fully trained, is like his teacher, because they are modeling you, they're copying you. And that, I want you to remember that. So then later, you would just say the word tree, and by listening, it would sound it out, E, and they would give a guess as to how to sound it. And they probably copied it enough times that it wouldn't even have to think that hard. And finally, maybe you let them come up with their own writing, and that's where you're going to start to get into the creative writing. And you say, why don't you write me a sentence about a tree? And of course, you might have to help them with some of the words when they're young. So let me get that order down. First of all, you're going to model it for them and have them copy it. So we call that copy work. Secondly, you're going to dictate a word to them, and they're going to try to write it from their mental picture in their mind. That's called dictation. So copy work, then dictation. And finally, creative writing, where they have to come up with it themselves and put it down on paper. So the copy work method is really important, and you should use that daily when your children are learning to decode and learn to read. Dictating, I would say maybe twice a week that you would go into that. It wouldn't have to be every day. You don't have to have this as a hard and fast rule, but definitely don't do it just once in a while. Do it often, but not necessarily every day. And then writing, do it as they have the desire to do it at this age. If they spell something wrong, but it's phonetic, just go along with it and say, good job. Maybe add that word to a spelling test list that you could have in your mind. We'll talk back more about spelling in just a second. But the point is don't criticize too much at this point. They don't have enough models in their mind, enough examples to be able to make a great job of writing. But the fact that they're trying to do it creatively out of their own mind is great. Okay. So let's talk about spelling for a second. Spelling lists from books is not a very efficient way to learn to spell. And everyone has curriculum, mostly because people ask the curriculum companies to make a curriculum because they don't know how to come up with spelling lists. I would like to tell you there are two kinds of spelling lists. One of them is all the words are spelled or grouped together phonetically. So you'd have all of the maybe rhyming words that would be all together, or words that all have, that OUGH sound that I was talking about earlier. Or here is a list of words that all have a short A sound, like ah. And those are phonetic spelling words, and they're great because your kids start to see a pattern. So I'm not saying ditch the whole spelling list, but just don't feel that you're tied to it again. If you give them a little pretest and they can spell all the words, then go for it. But what I like about those kinds of lists, especially in the younger grades, first and second grade or so, is that you see all the patterns in our language, all the things that we do, words have in common with each other. We make jokes about our English language and how difficult it is, but it's kind of nice in those early years to really emphasize the ways that our languages, all the words are similar, and that there really are patterns. No, not everything follows the pattern. It would be nice, but it's really nice to have that, those grouped common words at the early years. But don't feel you have to stick to the list. You could come up with your own list. If you see your child is struggling with a certain phonetic rule in spelling, then you could add it to your own list and think of some other words that go with it, 5 words or so, and that'll be fine. The second approach to spelling is the common word approach. And even in our curriculum, we do this from 3rd grade up. So we think, the most common words in our language, 1,000 of them or so. And then over a few years, we make sure you cover them. But you could do that too. As your child is doing their writing assignments for other things, you could take note of the words that they misspell. And if they're using it, it's a common word, right? So you could just take note of them. And when you've got a collection of 5 to 10 words that your child has misspelled, you could have some spelling that week and give them a spelling test, go through the whole week and give them a test on Friday. So you don't have to use the curriculum. Again, the benefit of a curriculum is just to remember to actually talk about spelling. And what I wanted to say is that spelling, the benefit is in that little bit of discussion you're going to have. And in our house, it's like once a week, we have a little spelling discussion. And the other days they're doing some, they're copying the words that they have and maybe writing sentences or looking up what they mean in the dictionary and getting some of those skills. But having that discussion with them about why a word is spelled that way, and you might not know yourself, you can look it up at dictionary.com. I put that app on my phone. That's kind of nice because then you can look up a little bit about the etymology of the word, which means where did it come from, and tell your kids about it. And just learn together. It's fun. But you don't have to make this a really long, drawn out affair. And the final thing that I would recommend, though, that's better and more efficient than using a curriculum is what I was saying. Take note of the words that your child misspells and then add them to a spelling list. One year I had a student that was really struggling in spelling. So I had like an alphabetical set of pages in my teacher binder. And when she misspelled a word that started with the letter B, stick it in that book under the letter B. Another way you could arrange them is by common sounds and such. So like if she had trouble spelling I before E, except after C, you could have a page in your teacher book that you write down words that she's struggling with till you get 3 to 5 of them. And then you give her a test over them that week. So again, you wouldn't have to have spelling every week, just have it when the need arises. So lastly, teach handwriting along with spelling, copywork, dictation. You need to be teaching handwriting. And again, you can model how to make a cursive letter. And it doesn't have to go in the order of a curriculum, but it's a great kind of cool thing to use spelling as a way to work on the cursive for that. If you're coming from public school and transitioning in a couple years into homeschooling and your curriculum suddenly has cursive everywhere, you can just set the curriculum aside for a couple weeks and don't do any of that phonics or spelling and vocabulary, none of that. Just concentrate on cursive for a couple weeks. And generally speaking, if a child is, say, 8 or 9 and up, they should learn cursive in no time flat. And if a child is younger than that, in most curriculum, they're just going to be gradually learning it in the curriculum anyway, so you don't really need to do that extra. But if there's a letter that maybe your child has missed because of switching curriculum, then you can just take some time. My mom used to take a piece of notebook paper during church, and on the side of the notebook paper, she would write several different cursive letters and then hand it to me quietly. And while the pastor was teaching, I would just sit there and make rows and rows of those letters. And that's a lot of how I learned to do cursive. And so it doesn't take a fancy curriculum, just teach them one letter at a time and then teach them. I like spelling words again, because there's some words that they're already working on, and they can be, as they make the cursive letter, again, just like when they made that F back in kindergarten, when they make a cursive F, they need to be saying the F sound. That's important because as you use cursive to learn to spell, you want to be sounding out. So that's how you do it. And that's how you kind of do multiple subjects at one time. And it's just more efficient. Just be constantly thinking, I need to teach all these skills. So how could I do it with what's in front of us? I don't have to buy something special for this. It's just something we can do in front of us. Again, Ruth Beechick's book goes into lots and lots of cool ideas that you might want to get. The final step in learning to read is fluency. And then we typically find for a student that started in kindergarten, which you don't have to, this takes about 3rd grade. So if your student started pre-reading and decoding and blending at 3rd grade, then you're going to be maybe a little older before the time you get to fluency. And a lot of people skip this step. But before you send your child out to read a science book or a history book or read instructions in a manual so they can put together something, you need to make sure that they're actually a fluent reader. Don't push your children into harder books than they're ready for. Give them lots and lots and lots of practice so that they overlearn the skills that they've been learning, and they can decode anything. You don't want them also to struggle with really difficult vocabulary while they're trying to sound out words. So if you were putting them into scripture and sounding out the names of all of the different people in First Chronicles chapters 1 through, I don't know, 8 or 9, and you would get to the point where they couldn't even sound those names out. We as adults can't, and still maintain the meaning of what's being said. And that's one of the reasons those are so difficult. When you're having to do two things at once, sound it out and come up with what it means, then it's really difficult for your brain to do that. And so what's going to be sacrificed is the meaning. So don't worry about meaning in this time of fluency. Get those easy books at the library, those easy readers that are meant for a grade or two lower than what your child is, and give them time to overlearn those skills until they become automatic. So you say, well, how do I know if my child's comprehending when they're trying to sound out all the sounds? Well, if they're laughing, they've comprehended. If they ask a question about it, that means they must have comprehended what the sentence actually said. If they're choosing their own book, when you go to the library and they go in and choose a book on butterflies, then you know that they're comprehending because they knew that, they're choosing their own style of book and they are gaining some information from it. But I do want to encourage you to just constantly don't push the hard stuff, keep it simple. Some of the ways you can help with the fluency is to read together as a family a lot. Have your child read aloud from a simple book. Maybe they could use the reader that comes along with their curriculum. Have them read aloud from a simple book with good expression. So is it a question? Is it a command? So on, and just use good expression. Have the child read a story or a paragraph silently and then tell you back in his own words what he read. That's a good way. Have them read it silently and then draw a picture to illustrate the story. And really, really important, have them listen to you read, because you are setting that example that they can model, like we were just talking about. Okay. You need to, when you're choosing books for your children, choose books that are like Goldilocks. Some books are just too hard, and some books are just too easy, and some books are just right. That's the kind of book that you need to give your children at this stage when they're practicing. Not so easy that they're like Bob books, where they're like Sam sat. That's probably too easy at this stage. Real sentences with words that are all mixed up in their phonics skills are good. So here's a simple test, and your child can do this for themselves. If you pick up a book, and let's just say that it actually has a book that has actual paragraphs and sentences and stuff on it, okay? And your child starts to read the first page. Every time they come across a word that they had to really work to sound out, then have them put up a finger. And if they get to the bottom of that page and they run out of all their fingers and their thumb, they have 5 words that were too difficult for them to quickly decode, then that book is too hard. Okay. So that's just a really good way of checking if a book is difficult. Now, if there are only 1 or 2 words on the page that they didn't understand, then that's probably a good book to do. And you can help them learn to decode just those couple without them feeling absolutely overwhelmed. Okay. So, and then this goes into the kind of a thing that as you get older, and I'm kind of going to get off topic here for a second, but as you get into achievement tests and such, you want your children to be at a comfortable level in their schooling. You don't want to always be at the very top of their game where everything is difficult, nor do you want your children to always be at the easiest thing where everything is too easy and it's boring. You want everyone to be at the middle. And I don't care if they take achievement tests and they test out at a 6th grade level and they're only in the 4th grade. It's nice to be in the 4th grade and feel like everything is not too difficult. It's not too hard. If you actually put them in 6th grade at that moment, that really would actually probably be too hard for them. And if you put them down in 2nd grade, it would be really boring. So don't try to over push your children and don't under push them, but just keep things where it's just right. So that's a look at learning to read and the 5 steps. I talked about learning to write, creative writing, but I want to talk a little bit more about language itself. And we're going to talk more about this tomorrow in our sessions on how to teach. But language is how your children learn. And I don't mean by language just the English language, but just body language and musical language. And if they're going to be an electrician, electrical language, and the jargon that goes with every career has its own language. And that's the thing that helps a child learn. How do we learn those languages? Well, how does a baby learn a language? They learn it by listening and by trying to speak it themselves. So they hear and they copy, and then they try to mimic it. Okay. So what's the parallel for our language as we learn English or Spanish or whatever? The parallel is that we have to learn to read by sounding out all the sounds that our language made, and we have to learn to reproduce it by writing. So reading and writing become the two facets of learning a language. And if you really want to learn a language, you have to both read and write. Now, we already talked about copywork and dictation. Those are really important methods that have been used long before there was a curriculum or homeschooling or any of that had ever been thought about. Benjamin Franklin said that he learned to write by getting like journals on periodicals and then copying them word for word. And then he would go back and he would outline them. So he kind of remember the order in which things were. And then he'd put it away for a little while and then come back and try to word for word from his memory, write down what he had done like a day or two before. So the beauty of that method is that copying it verbatim kind of cements it in your brain, and then putting the framework on it of outlining it helps your brain have something to hang it on, and then coming back later. And he said he could reproduce it. And sometimes he thought his writing was even better than the original. A lot of writers and speakers do this. They think about everything they want to say. I've done it today. And they make a list of everything verbatim. Sometimes my husband writes out some sentences word for word what he wants to say, but most of the time he then goes back and makes an outline of a general framework of everything he wants to say, and then he puts it away for a little while, and then the day that he's going to speak, he sees if he can get close to what he originally was thinking about saying. And sometimes it comes out even better. And that's just the cool way that Yehovah made our brains to work. So I want you to know that writing is hard work. All those things and steps that I just listed for Benjamin Franklin or a speaker who's going to be writing, those are hard work. And when your kids go, do I have to write today? And the answer should be, yes, you do. You do have to write, but don't worry, let's make it fun. So there's a lot of ideas and curriculum. And like I said, Ruth Beechick in her book has lots and lots of ways that you can make writing fun. So let me show you just an idea of how it goes from easy to hard. Okay. So for instance, writing with this copy and reproduce model, like copy work and dictation, and then creative writing. Here's how it would work. First of all, very small child would trace a model letter. Okay. Then they would copy the model. So not just tracing it, but looking at it and making another copy of it. Maybe then you would say a word and they would have to write it from just listening, and they could get help. And then after they've got something memorized, like say their name and how to spell it, all the letters of their name, and they're very familiar with it, they've traced it and copied it, then now they are going to do it from memory. Okay. And that could be their address or their phone number, a favorite Bible verse, or a song that they love to sing. They could study a paragraph and write it out exactly as it was written in the original with all the punctuation, capital letters, and then compare it to the original and circle all the mistakes and try it again and see if you can get it better the second time. Then as a child gets older, they might be able to listen to someone speak, maybe on a YouTube, and then pause it and copy it down and try to get it word for word. Okay, so you can just see this is starting to get more difficult. Goodness, you could have someone dictate an entire short speech, like an essay or a news story that they're watching, something that's just several minutes long, and see if they can do that. You also could try to do it multiple times, the same thing over and over, and try to get it better. Taking notes. This is something that people do, and everybody knows about that. But did you see all the steps I went from young age writing language skills all the way up to let's take notes during a sermon or during a college class. You don't just go from point A to point B. You have to go all the little steps in between. And, as an adult, then you're writing letters to the editor, or you're writing your own blog or publishing your own book. Those things have happened because there's been this daily foundation of writing practice. And a lot of it was not creative, original writing, but simply copying and having someone dictate to you and try to copy it, from what you heard correctly. And that gradual increase in difficulty over the years makes for a good writer. With the fact that you are homeschooling means that you don't have to follow the curriculum. Just if you get the idea of how to do this, you can give the assignments to your children. Of course, the benefit of a curriculum is that you don't have to think of them every day, but don't teach to the curriculum, teach to your child. If you know your child has a weakness in commas, then you can find sentences with lots of commas in them and have them copy them and discuss why did they put a comma right there, okay? There are a lot of parts to language besides just sounding out words. There is capital letters and when not to do capital letters, grammar. How do you know what good grammar is and what isn't? What about punctuation and when to put a comma, when to put a question mark? All of those things have to be learned. What about knowing how to write a letter, a formal business letter compared to a friendly letter? All of these things have their own mechanics and proper etiquette in our world, and you have to slowly teach them all of these things. Never mind vocabulary and spelling and synonyms and homonyms and all of this. The best way to teach it is not to depend so heavily on a curriculum that they're not going to miss any pieces and they're going to get it all down pat and your kids won't have any gaps, because I don't think there's a perfect curriculum out there that's going to really achieve that, because even if they have it taught on day 46 of fourth grade, your child might not have been paying attention on day 46 and they might not learn it. So you as a mom can take the real world experiences of writing paragraphs and sentences and give them lots of opportunities, compare theirs to the original, and teach them right on the spot. And I just think it's a lot more efficient. Okay. I will say, just in conclusion on this writing, on all of this language stuff, that sometimes it's really helpful as a mom to have some good reference books on your shelf. Maybe the whole reason you need to buy a grammar curriculum is so that you can learn grammar. And maybe the whole reason you need to buy a phonics curriculum is you never learned phonics yourself, and you need to have those reference books. You need to study it and find out, why does it happen like this? There are other great books such as the ABCs and all their tricks. That's a fun book to have on your shelf, or just books on the roots of vocabulary words and etymology, and just apps on your phone can do a lot of this, and they're usually free. So teach yourself, and so that you can look up the answer when you don't know why do you put a comma right there? Well, because it's a dependent clause. What's a dependent clause? So then you have to go look that up. Well, a dependent clause is one that for its meaning, it could not be all by itself in a sentence, or it wouldn't make sense. Oh, suddenly you know that if something is dependent on the rest of the sentence, then you might have to put a comma there. It's like, that makes sense. Or apostrophes, there's a million rules for those, for contractions and are you saying can't or cannot? So all of these things, it's nice to have a curriculum for, but it's also nice to have some reference books. And as a mom, you learn how to do it too. Okay. I want to say one final thing. As I keep saying, you can customize your child's education. You don't have to just follow the curriculum. You might be in a state where you are required to teach certain subjects, and to prove that you did, and for your own benefit, so that you feel confident and know that you taught something, you might want to have a planner, and in your teacher planner, at the end of the day, not the beginning, but at the end of the day, write down what you taught that day, any things that really stood out to you. Say, we did spelling today. We did vocabulary today because we talked about etymologies of words. We did grammar today because we looked up what an independent clause or a dependent clause were. And write those things down, just a brief note in your planner, so that as you look back, you go, you know what, we did spelling this week. Oh my goodness, we really did a lot of language arts this week. We learned a lot about how language works. Cool. So that's would be my advice. I'm going to finish with arithmetic, and arithmetic really is the reason I put it last is because it's a language itself. It's the language of numbers. And the thing about it is we all have a sense of arithmetic. I mean, you really wouldn't need to take arithmetic to just handle the real world. You can count out how many pieces of pizza and this and that. But did you notice that it counts? So we start just like pre-reading, we start with pre-arithmetic. With just everyday life, we teach our children what it is they need to know to function in society, and the hands-on touching things, they get an idea of what things are. So I'm going to put this back a little bit. So they get an idea that that is 4 beads and that is 8 beads. You know, just because they're counting things as small children, you should be counting and talking about numbers just like you are words and sounds and science and all of those things. It goes back to having discussions again. Doing discussion about numbers and finding things to count is, again, the application of Deuteronomy 6, that you do it when you're sitting and walking and standing and lying down. You can talk about these things. And the more real world experiences you get, the better. Now, one of the reasons that parents, when they're going to be teaching math skills and arithmetic skills, one of the reasons they get so worried is because they feel like they didn't have a good education themselves. And you can overcome this, and there's really only one way to do it, and that is for you to learn the math right along with your kids. If you really don't feel confident in math, then why don't you buy 2 math workbooks and you sit and work maybe a week ahead of your student? And that way you've already done all the work in that math book, and you've had a sense of, I didn't understand this, and you had some time to Google it or write to the publisher and get help, or whatever it is it took to understand it and really get a grasp. And then the following week, you can then teach that lesson to your child. I think that the only problem with what I just said about you should learn it yourself is that a lot of times we as parents are really busy, and the thought of having to come up with time to study a subject all by ourselves and then teach it also just seems overwhelming. I know that I feel that way about Hebrew because sometimes I fall off the wagon in finding time to actually study it and practice and copy things out and practice my flashcards and don't forget the vocabulary words you already learned. And all of that just takes time. And then I have to then go back and teach it to my children and then potentially come in and write curriculum about it later. I'm not going to do that yet. But anyway, it can just make this low level of anxiety. So as much as possible, the answer to this is to do life together with your kids. When if the reason that you don't have time is because you've got dinner to cook and you've got a house to clean and you've got errands to run, do the cooking, the dinner, and the cleaning and the errands together as a family. And then when they're in school time, sit together and do school together. And it's really hard because we want to just put our kids down with a workbook and teach them math. Let the workbook teach them math, and we go get something else done. But that's not the best way to teach our kids. The best way is for us to take personal responsibility and to sit down with them ourselves and to learn right along with them. If you already know it, it's probably been a lot of years since you had math, so you might even need to review it. Now, if your student has really got a love for math, and I've personally, I think that kids that love to read, you sometimes have a harder time in math because it's a different language. Okay, that's all it is, another language they're learning. And the kids that learn to or love math and are really good at it are sometimes slow in learning to read. And it's the same thing. It's a different language. And so they don't have time to learn 2 languages at the same time. So if you can understand that, you might slow down on the hard one. Wait till let's say the child has a difficult time in reading, but they're good in math. You might emphasize math for a little while they're good at it and doing well until it becomes kind of automatic, and then go back over here and work on this other language. So if you view these things, reading, writing, and arithmetic, as separate languages, I think it'll help you understand why it's so difficult to do all three at the same time and why we have tears when we try and why we need to keep those lessons short and just focus maybe on one lesson, one language at a time. Okay. And don't throw typing in there and Hebrew and everything else. Try to just learn little bits of every language and only concentrate heavily on one. Okay. For a child that arithmetic comes easily for, put a lot of variety and fun into it. And maybe this is the time where you might teach them new math instead of just the old traditional way. Teach them multiple ways of solving the same problem. And this is where you might have to go online to YouTube or Khan Academy or one of those free resources and come up with alternate ways of thinking about math. And that's a lot of fun. But if you have a child who's struggling in math and you try to throw in all of those alternatives and teach them like 4 different ways to do a subtraction problem, they're just going to feel overwhelmed. I recommend you teach them only one way to subtract and then to have them do it over and over and over and over again until it becomes really, really easy. And then in a later grade, maybe 7th or 8th grade, you can come back and have some of those fun other ways of thinking about it to stretch their mental abilities. But one way is good. One way is all that's really needed. In other words, don't challenge them so much that they get overwhelmed. Finally, as we think about testing in math is one of those subjects that, we like to think that we can give our kids tests in because we can prove that they learned it. You can do that in spelling as well. And you can probably do it in all different types of language activities. But in math, it's just easy to have a weekly math test. I want you to think about the purpose of math tests. You're going to have math tests that are on achievement tests. And really the purpose for those is we don't know what the purpose is because they're trying to compare every child in the world and see that they're all at the exact same moment at the exact same time, which is totally not realistic. So the use of an achievement test is not going to be terribly helpful for you as a parent. So don't worry about those too much. Just take them if required and get back to life. As far as unit tests, the things that come at the end of a unit in math, those aren't terribly useful in a homeschool environment because the purpose of a unit test is so the teacher can see that the 30 students in her classroom have all learned that concept really well and she can go on to the next one. But you sat with your child and did math together and you know that they could do all the problems on their worksheet. So you don't need a unit test because you already know that they know how to do it. So really the only use for a test for you, and one of the reasons I really enjoy doing a test once a week over whatever just happens to be on that day, is because your child can find out what areas they are weak in. So for instance, they need to see with their own eyes that even though you sat next to them and you did multiplication together, they're still having a hard time remembering what 4 times 6 is. And it shows up on their math test that week. Oh yeah. And so instead of having to practice everything in the entire unit, you could just practice 4 times 6 and get that down. So having that weekly test over whatever they're doing, and in our house, we would just do it on Friday of every week. But it wouldn't matter. Just pick a day to do a test once a week, and whatever problems show up on the page that day, then kind of tuck in your mind, we better do a little extra review on the chalkboard or the whiteboard tomorrow over that. So, and then you don't have to review everything, just those couple things. And that's the benefit of a test and pretty much nothing else. Sometimes though, a test and seeing a child do well on it is also a confidence booster for the child. And I really like rewarding for tests when a child gets 100 on a test, give them candy or some other prize that they are going to be like, yes, I worked hard and I got it, because it boosts their confidence. But I'm not trying to test over blocks of information that go back weeks and weeks. Again, just what we did that week. So it's nice and fresh. And we're just checking for things. Either I'm going to find out we need to work on 4 times 6, or they're going to be like, yeah, I know it. And they get their little treat that they earned. Okay, just like in reading, there are different things that are needed to be learned in math. The first thing is manipulatives, and I have manipulatives here. I'm going to pull some out. I like having a bag of manipulatives, and so this is just a silly bag, and I haven't actually needed to use it in the last few weeks, so it's kind of not got as much in it as I could. Let me see here if I have another one. So I don't see my other bag of manipulatives, but you could just do all kinds of things. Here's some straws, and straws that were just grouped in sets of 10. So right here, some of them are loose. right here are 30 straws, okay? And I've got them grouped together, and I can use those for all kinds of things. I'll show you that in just a second. In fact, I have another video about manipulatives, and I might just link it so you can see it later for yourself. But some fun things to keep are, some dice, so you can roll things and they can maybe multiply the two numbers together, add them together, or whatever. It's nice to have some money so that you can practice counting. Money is fantastic for grouping things together. It's nice to have things like Legos. Legos are great because this brick here has 8 on it, actually 2 rows of 4. So Legos have all different kinds of sizes, and you can use them to get hands on. But you can use whatever you find around the house. We've used crayons, we've used Hot Wheels, we've definitely used Legos. They're just all kinds of things that you can use. But actually touching and counting and even multiplying actual objects is the foundation that all other math is going to be built on, just like sounds of individual letters was the foundation that all other reading was based on. Then after the manipulative stage, where they touch and feel real objects, is the mental image stage, where they can picture 4 objects. Or with my kids, I really like to do pizza, and they can picture a pizza with 8 slices in it. Sometimes I'll just draw it if they can't picture it, and I'll draw a circle and cut it up into slices like a pizza. And if they still can't picture it, then we get a pizza and we touch it and we cut it and we count it and so on. So you don't try to go to the mental image stage unless you've actually done it with your hands. So for instance, in our algebra curriculum, I like to talk to my kids about a teeter-totter at a park. And if you put a big daddy on one side of the teeter-totter and a little child on the other side, obviously daddy's heavier, and that side of the teeter-totter is gonna, let me see if I can do it, it's gonna fall. But for a young child, just talking about that isn't going to be very effective. You need to go to the park and you need to actually do it. So as much as possible, for instance, when you're talking about time, I like to actually use, one of these clocks that has gears on it, but this is almost a mental one. You should go to the kitchen, to the clock on the wall, and do it there. Calendars, do it every day. Mark the date on the calendar. Find out what the weather is and track how many days out of the month were cloudy compared to how many days were sunny. Basically, the idea I'm trying to say, though, is that when you get up in front of your kids and you say, if you had 3 pizzas and you divided them on this many kids, how many pieces of pizza were left? Well, they're going to have to picture all of that in their mind. And one of the things that's difficult about math is they can't picture it. Before you get into that mental math, get as much as possible hands-on. And the curriculum that you're using should be telling you to go into the kitchen and get this and, pour 1/2 cup in and pour a 3/4 cup in and so on. It should be telling you to put your hands on. It should be telling you to collect teddy bears and put them in groups of 3 and so on. And a lot of times workbooks that you purchase for children will try to combine it all at one time. They'll have 3 balls, and then they'll have the number 3, which is abstract, very abstract. We'll get to that in a second. And then they'll have them count it, but they aren't balls. I'm trying to encourage you to go and actually touch real objects. So if your child is having trouble with a concept in math, it's likely that they just don't have enough manipulative experience. And as a mom, you can be looking at that math worksheet and whatever the problem is on it, and you can think to yourself, how could I explain this with real world examples that I can put my hands on? And obviously this is going to work better in the younger grades in arithmetic than it isn't when you start to get into algebra, but it can still work there. Try to take everything back down to the concrete stage. And if you don't have, that exact object, then you can do a mental picture and try to tell a story and get them to almost touch and feel it. It's so important to do this as a mom. Your job is to be the teacher. And to do that, you've got to take them to the place so they can experience it. That means you can't be short-tempered with them. You've got to sit there and take them and explain it in a way that they would encounter it in the real world. Then what does that look like mentally? See if they can picture it in their mind. They're actually thinking of a real world example. And only after that do you turn it into symbols and actual numbers. So like, this is what I'm trying to say. When you are trying to explain the three balls, you would actually go into the kitchen. Well, you wouldn't have balls in the kitchen. Maybe you'd go outside and you'd find three balls. Now, I've drawn some pictures here. Now, those don't look, maybe they look like oranges. I don't know. I'm not very good at drawing. You've got three balls right there. And you count them, you touch them, you feel them. How do you subtract from that? How do you multiply them? And talk about it the whole time. This discussion in the Torah where we do it when we sit and we walk and so on, it's got to happen so that it turns into real world experience. Only later, after you've done all of that, and they can picture it in their mind just as well as they could if they were touching it, then will that make sense. And that's, I guess, what I'm trying to say is it's you can't have the symbol, you can't have what we would call the abstract or the language. They aren't going to understand the language if they've never experienced three balls. In the same way, when you see an F, you don't know that makes a F sound. It's a symbol. It's an abstract thing. It doesn't have any meaning on its own. I love Hebrew because when you go into Hebrew, so here is an F sound, my bad handwriting in Hebrew. And that's cool because it's actually it's supposed to be someone's face or their mouth. And so if you start to think of that as someone's face, and face starts with the sound of f. So this f sound, like we as adults see that and we think f, but a child doesn't. It's just a bunch of scribbles. And in math, let's do 3a plus 2 equals 14. That's very abstract. It means nothing until you have turned that into actual hands-on experience. And we can do that in the actual math curriculum. And I won't make you do algebra today. But the point being, you have to put this in order. You have to have the hands-on real-world experience. And that means your job as a mom in math is to take what's difficult and turn it into something they've already experienced, that they can see in their mind's eye, preferably with their hands, and then in their mind's eye. And then only then will the abstract principles and symbols that are all over their page make sense. One of the reasons in our curriculum we have our students go through each level twice is because the first time that you go through it, you could really spend a lot of time hands-on and talking about the stories, doing a lot of thinking in that real-world example mode. And then the second time you go back through that curriculum, they won't need that as much. And now it can just become practice and become automatic. And because we really do want math to become not always having to think so hard, but sometimes to just become automatic. And I'm going to give you an example of that real quick. I talked about these straws a little bit ago, and I said that I had packages of them. This is 30 straws. Each one has 10 in it. And then I also have in my bag some loose straws. So there's 2 loose straws. Okay, so I know because I counted that each one of those has 10 straws in it. And so if I were at a young child's concrete level, I would take the rubber band off and I would actually count out how many straws are each one of these packs. And of course, your child can easily learn to count that this is 2. So eventually they're just going to look at it, 32. They just know it because they've been doing it so long. And then you want to get to the point where you can write 32 and it represents the same thing in their mind as those straws. Does that make sense? So you are moving from concrete touch and feel to I can picture the straws in my mind to that's what 32 means. So that's the general principle that you want to use in all of math. So with this view of education, you can delay some of those difficult abstract concepts a little bit longer, and you wouldn't even need them. You could wait. Isaac Newton, he's a famous example. I mean, as smart as he was, as many things as he invented, he didn't even take math until he was a teenager. He didn't even touch algebra till he was at the university level. And then he went so quickly that he invented new ways to do algebra and became an instructor in a very short time. We're not going to all be Isaac Newtons. I'm sure that his brain must have had a lot of ways to think about things so that he understood it quickly when he was presented with the abstract symbols. There is a benefit, though, in learning some abstract symbols. And by abstract symbols, I mean learning to write abstract symbols from a young age. There's a couple reasons you do it, and it's the same as why we do it in the language of English as we're learning to read English, or the language of Hebrew. The language of math is the same thing. It takes hand and eye control and fine motor skills to be able to write our numbers. That is its own thing. Just like in writing letters, learning to actually do the handwriting or the cursive these are their own separate skills. I might be able to sound out this word with magnets and not have to write it, but writing it and making my hand do it is its own entirely different thing. And if I have to sound out at the same time, then it's a new thing I have to do. And in math, thinking that, I have 3 pieces of pizza plus 2 pieces of pizza makes 5 pieces of pizza, that's very abstract. But either way, I still have to actually learn to shape a 3 and shape a plus sign and shape a 2, an equal sign, and a 5. So you need a lot of practice in that as well. And for that reason, I myself do not recommend waiting to do all abstract symbols until they're older. You absolutely could, but I think there's a benefit in young children while their hands are learning, the brains are learning what the actual concrete things are. The hands can be learning to form. And so I personally think there's a good benefit to doing both of them. Just don't expect that just because your child has a hard time doing long division and getting all the columns straight and lined up just so that it doesn't understand how to divide. He probably does. And on top of that, he's having to memorize things. It's a very, very complicated procedure to do long division. Don't expect that just because your child has trouble in one area that they're having trouble in everything. See if you can take some of it down a level or two and do it with them. That is my advice. Just sit at the table and do it with them. And that automatically reduces the difficulty. Anyway, simultaneously, they do need to be learning all of these skills. Some ways that you can do real life math outside of the workbook, outside of math time, is to have a game area somewhere in your house where you play games. I had dice and little game pieces over here in my manipulatives box. And we have an area over here in our closet where all the games are, and then some more in the drawer, especially smaller things like card games. And so card games and board games are fantastic for learning math skills and having that concrete hands-on ability. And later, as they learn to play a game like Monopoly, they're also learning to think mentally and solve problems. And yet they're going to have so much fun doing it. Taking them to the grocery store with you. That's a great place to learn math. Help them figure out all kinds of things there. How about being in the kitchen? Again, remember I said the only way to get all the homeschooling done and keep your sanity is to do stuff together. Well, while you're doing it, while you're going, discuss. And this is such a Torah principle. Your difficulty of life will come down because you will be with your children, and goodness, their behavior will probably improve because you'll be with them. But you'll also have opportunities as you're going about life to discuss things they're learning academically. In the dining area, setting the table, or just discussing things as you have meals together and talking about real life. You might be surprised how much you talk about economics and what gas prices are right now. And kids ask, well, why are gas prices going up or down? And you can have really complicated discussions with small children that would never be able to conquer that topic on a math worksheet. In the yard, out in the garage, in the workshop, as you're driving the car, as you're on devices and looking things up. These are all times in which you can have real world discussions. And I think you'll find that everything just starts to make sense. I want to encourage you again, get these books. Let me get the other one for you. Buried it underneath all the manipulatives. And You Can Teach Your Child Successfully by Ruth Beechick and The 3 R's by Ruth Beechick. And just think about the fact that you can do this, but it requires you to have discussions with your children and to be there talking with them and making what they're learning apply to experiences that they've already had. That's really all that homeschooling is. And the purpose of curriculum is not to slave drive you, but to give you a track to run on, and you can just as easily decide to go off track and come back. Real quick before I go, I wanted to tell you about my teacher planner. On our website, we call it the Together School Planner, but I just use it to keep track of what page we're on in different subjects. Maybe we're in lesson 13 in one subject and lesson 23 in another subject, but I'm not going to remember that if I have a lot of children that I'm homeschooling. And even if I only had one, I'm not going to remember. Don't feel you have to be on page 13 for every subject at every time. Go fast when the opportunity presents itself. Go slow when the opportunity presents itself, and go just right. There we go again. But keep track of it on your planner, and don't feel this stress of I have to get to day 180 when we are on our 180th day of school. You likely, in a realistic world, you won't. So just keep track of it, and then take your summer break, and when you come back, just start in again wherever you were. Maybe some review that might get you slow started again. You still won't get 180 days done, and that is okay. So things like memberships are nice because you can just go in and pick and choose where you need to be, but don't feel driven by curriculum to stay on their preconceived idea of what will work for your child. You take control and you sit and discuss with your child, and those discussions will matter so much more. The curriculum is just there to guide you. So I hope that helps. I hope it didn't bring up even more questions, but if it did, I'd love to hear them from you, and we would be happy to help you out. Tomorrow morning, we're going to talk not so much about the specifics of reading, writing, and arithmetic, but just the general principles of how to teach something, whether it's how to teach the Torah to your children or math or science or whatever it is. We're going to start diving into what a good teacher does and how they think, and try to give you some skills to how to be an effective teacher. We're going to do that twice tomorrow, 2 parts to that. So I hope you'll join us back then. Shalom.